Chosen one. You don't need anyone to confirm that you're different. You've known that long before any video told you so. You've felt it in the nights you sat alone, unable to explain to anyone why you couldn't just be normal. The question isn't whether you carry something uncommon. The question is this: have you recognized it yet, or have you been calling it by the wrong name? Here's the thing. You didn't come to this video by accident. Not really. People who are simply curious don't find their way here. People who have felt something knocking, something they couldn't silence and couldn't explain, those are the ones who arrive at a moment like this. And that knock has been there for a while, hasn't it? You've tried to ignore it. You've tried to rationalize it. You've told yourself it was anxiety or ambition or just the way you're wired. But it keeps coming back louder every time you settle for something smaller than what your spirit knows you're capable of. Stay with me, because what I'm about to say is going to reframe everything you've been calling a problem. The confusion you've been carrying, that restlessness, that sense of displacement, that feeling of being in a world that doesn't quite fit. It isn't a disorder. It isn't brokenness. It isn't evidence that something went wrong with you. It's a mechanism, and it's been running exactly as designed. Think about that. You weren't placed in difficulty because the universe made an error. You weren't handed suffering because you were overlooked. The challenges that have marked your life, the ones that seem disproportionate, the ones that made no logical sense, the ones other people didn't understand, they weren't accidents. They were part of a process that was already in motion before you had language to describe what was happening to you. Here's what nobody tells you. Raw ore doesn't know it can become a blade. It only knows it's being subjected to heat. It only knows the pressure is real and the fire isn't stopping. In that furnace, it doesn't feel chosen. It just feels like it's burning. But the refiner doesn't put something into the fire that he intends to discard. He puts in what he intends to keep. And the intensity of the heat isn't a sign of punishment. It's a sign of what he believes the material is capable of becoming. Now watch this. The bloodline you carry, and I'm not talking about biology, not ancestry in the material sense, the spiritual lineage you were born into isn't activated through comfort. It doesn't wake up when life is easy. It's activated through pressure, through the specific kind of fire that strips away everything that was never really you to begin with. That's why your path has looked different from the people around you. Not because you're cursed, not because you're behind, but because you're being made into something that requires a different process entirely. The people who walked the smooth road didn't need what you needed. The refiner looked at them and said, "That's fine, the easy path will do." And he looked at you and said, "No, not yet. There's still something being formed here that comfort would ruin." And so the fire kept going. You survived betrayals that should have made you bitter, but they didn't. Not fully. You survived losses that should have made you shut down, but something in you refused to close. You've walked through seasons that looked like destruction from the outside. But here you are, still standing, still searching, still sensing that there's something you're supposed to become. Let that land. Here's the thing most people miss about this kind of calling. They think the pain was the problem to be solved. They think the difficulty was the obstacle standing between them and their purpose. So they spend years trying to get past it, so they can finally arrive at the place where the real work begins. But the difficulty wasn't blocking the path. It was the path. The suffering wasn't separating you from your identity. It was revealing it layer by layer, heat by heat, burning off everything that was placed on you, that was never actually yours. The false versions of yourself, the identities built for other people's comfort, the limitations handed to you before you were old enough to question them. You're not in disorder. You never were. You've been in process. And the reason it's felt so disorienting, so hard to explain, so impossible to justify to the people around you is that most people don't have language for what's happening to you because most people aren't going through it. But you are. And now it's time to understand what that actually means. Because before we go any further, we need to tear down the exact lie that's been making you fight against your own design, the lie that was handed to you so early you mistook it for the truth. So let's talk about the lie. Not a small one, not the kind you can spot easily and walk away from. We're talking about the kind that was installed so early, so quietly, and by so many trusted voices that you never thought to question it. You absorbed it the way children absorb language, not by choosing to, but simply by being present while it was spoken over you, around you, and eventually through you. And that lie has been the single greatest source of friction between you and your own design. Here's the thing. The system most people operate inside, the one that defines success, normalcy, and worth, was never built to accommodate what you carry. It was built for a different kind of person, a person who fits, a person who follows the established path, measures progress by conventional markers, and finds comfort in sameness. And when you, someone built with a completely different internal architecture, tried to run yourself through that system, it produced exactly one outcome. It told you something was wrong with you. Stay with me. Because this is where the damage was done. The system said, if you're struggling more than others, you're weaker than others. If you don't fit in, you're broken. If your path looks different, you've made wrong choices. If you feel things more deeply than the people around you, you're too sensitive, too intense, too much. And the worst part isn't that the system said it. The worst part is that you believed it. You took that verdict and you internalized it. You started managing yourself according to a diagnosis that was never accurate. Think about that. You spent years, maybe decades, trying to fix something in yourself that was never actually broken. You tried to be less intense, less questioning, less aware. You tried to want what the people around you wanted, to find satisfaction in what they found satisfying. And every time you couldn't sustain it, every time the real you broke through the performance, you walked away with more evidence that you were the problem. That's not a minor mistake. That's a life lived in opposition to your own nature. Here's what nobody tells you about the way this system handles people like you. It doesn't reject you because you're weak. It rejects you because you're disruptive. Your presence, the way you ask questions others don't ask, the way you see through what others accept, the way you refuse to fully settle, creates friction in systems built on compliance. And systems built on compliance don't respond to friction by asking whether the friction might be valid. They respond by labeling it a malfunction. So you were labeled, and you wore that label for far too long. Now watch this. In a room full of people, you've been the one who noticed what no one else addressed. You've been the one who sensed that something was off before it became obvious. You've been the one who couldn't pretend, not convincingly, not for long. And every single time the world around you responded not with curiosity, but with correction. Sit down, fall in line, stop making things complicated. And because you were surrounded by that response long enough, part of you started to agree with it. That agreement is the lie, and it's time to put it down. The refiner doesn't design a blade and then apologize for its edge. The sharpness isn't a flaw to be filed down, it's the point. Your intensity isn't a character defect. Your inability to settle isn't restlessness without purpose. Your pattern of seeing through deception isn't arrogance. These aren't things about you that need to be corrected. They're functions of a design that was built for a specific kind of work that requires exactly what you've been told was too much. Let that land. Because this reframe isn't about flattery. It's not about making you feel better after a hard week. It's a structural correction. When a blueprint is misread, the building goes up wrong, not because the blueprint was flawed, but because it was interpreted through the wrong set of assumptions. You've been built according to one blueprint and evaluated according to another. And the gap between those two things is where all the confusion has lived. Here's the thing about moving forward from this point. You can't undo the years you spent trying to fit a frame that was never made for you. But you can stop using that frame as your reference point right now. The old version of you accepted the verdict of a system that didn't have the capacity to read you correctly. That version made sense at the time you were working with the information you had, but you're not working with that information anymore. The lie has been named, and a lie that's been named has lost most of its power. What comes next isn't about fixing yourself. It's about understanding exactly what you were actually designed to do and why the process that brought you here was never the enemy. You've seen the lie now. You've named it. And naming it changes something, not everything, not immediately, but something real shifts when you stop calling a blueprint a defect. But here's where most people get stuck. They see the lie, they feel the relief of that recognition, and then they stay right there. They trade one passive position for another. Instead of something is wrong with me, they land on something was done to me. And while that's closer to the truth, it's still not the full truth. Because the moment you stop being the problem and start being the victim, you've only moved halfway across the room. Here's the thing. There's a question that defines everything about how you'll move from this point forward. It's not, why did this happen to me? That question has a ceiling. You can ask it for the rest of your life, and the most it'll ever give you is an explanation, and explanations don't build anything. The question that actually moves things is this: what is being formed in me through this, and what am I being prepared to carry? That question has no ceiling. It opens into territory that keeps expanding the more honestly you engage with it. Stay with me. This isn't about spiritual bypassing. It's not about pretending the hard things weren't hard, or that the people who hurt you were secretly doing you a favor. Some of what you've been through was genuinely unjust. Some of the people who left marks on your story were operating out of their own damage, and that damage landed on you in ways you didn't deserve. That's real. But here's what's also real. The refiner is not limited by the intentions of the people he uses as instruments. He can take what was meant to diminish you and run it through a process that produces something entirely different. Not despite the pain, through it. Think about that. The betrayal that isolated you also taught you exactly who you can trust, and that knowledge is worth more than the relationship it cost. The failure that humiliated you also revealed the exact gap in your foundation that would have collapsed under greater weight later. The season that looked like being set back was actually the season you were being set apart. Victim and steward are looking at the same set of events, but one of them is asking what happened to them, and the other is asking what's being built through them. That difference in posture changes everything about what gets extracted from the experience. Now watch this. A steward doesn't own the design, they manage it. That's an important distinction. This isn't about deciding you're the author of your own story in some self-made, self-sufficient sense. It's about recognizing that you've been entrusted with something, and that trust comes with active responsibility. The refiner designed the process, but you're the one who has to show up inside it with your eyes open. You can go through fire passively being dragged through, surviving it, emerging and wondering what that was about. Or you can go through it as someone who understands that the heat has a purpose, and their participation in that purpose is not optional. Here's what nobody tells you about the shift from victim to steward. It's uncomfortable in a completely different way than victimhood is. Victimhood is painful, but it's also relieving because it removes your responsibility. If everything is being done to you, then nothing is required of you except to endure. Stewardship asks more. It says, yes, you didn't choose the fire, but you do choose what you do while you're in it. You choose whether you become bitter or refined. You choose whether the isolation teaches you discernment or just teaches you to be alone. The fire is the refiner's domain. What you become in it, that's yours. Take a breath right now, not a rushed one, the kind that tells your system, I'm still here, because this is a lot to sit with. The idea that your hardest seasons weren't mistakes in the design, they were the design that requires a kind of trust that doesn't come easily, especially when the evidence of your life has sometimes felt like the opposite of care. But consider this, an apprentice who doesn't understand the master's method will always misread the process. They'll think the difficult assignments are punishment. They'll think the silence is abandonment. They'll think the pressure is evidence that they've failed. Until the day they see the finished work and understand every single step was deliberate. Chosen one. You're not behind. You're not being punished. You're not a cautionary tale about what happens when things go wrong. You're an apprentice in a process run by the most precise refiner there is, one who doesn't waste heat, doesn't miscalculate pressure, and doesn't put anything in the furnace that he doesn't intend to bring out stronger than it went in. The question was never whether you'd survive it. The question was always what you'd be willing to understand while you did. And now that the frame has shifted, now that you're standing on this side of the lie, we can start talking about the actual tools, because the mechanism runs deeper than you've been shown yet. Now that the frame has shifted, now that you're standing inside the role of steward rather than victim, the next question isn't philosophical, it's practical. Because stewardship without discernment is just endurance with a better attitude, and endurance alone won't tell you what to do next. What you actually need is the ability to read what's happening to you with enough precision that you can respond correctly instead of just surviving repeatedly. That's what this chapter is about. Not surviving the fire, reading it. Here's the thing, not all pain is the same. Not all difficulty is communicating the same message. One of the most costly mistakes people on this path make is treating every hard season identically pushing through everything, or alternatively trying to escape everything without stopping to ask what this particular fire is actually saying. Because the refiner uses heat in more than one way. And if you can't tell the difference, you'll stay in fires you were meant to leave, and you'll run from fires you were meant to endure. Both errors are expensive. Stay with me. There are 3 distinct types of fire that show up in the life of someone carrying this kind of calling, and learning to distinguish between them is one of the most important skills you'll ever develop. The first is refining fire. This is the fire that hurts because something is being removed, a false identity, a limiting belief, an attachment that was keeping you small. It's the heat that feels like loss, but is actually clarification. The signature of refining fire is this: the longer you stay present in it without running, the clearer you become. Not clearer about the pain, clearer about yourself. If you've ever come out of a brutal season and thought, I know exactly who I am now, in a way I never did before, that was refining fire doing its work. The second type is warning fire. This one is different in texture. It doesn't refine its signals. It's the persistent discomfort that shows up when you're in the wrong environment, aligned with the wrong people, or moving in a direction that contradicts your design. Warning fire doesn't get better the longer you stay in it. It gets worse. It accumulates. And the reason so many people ignore it for so long is that they've been taught that discomfort always means growth, so they reframe warning signals as character-building exercises and stay in situations they were never meant to remain in. Here's how you tell the difference. Refining fire produces increasing clarity over time. Warning fire produces increasing depletion. If you're getting more confused, more drained, more disconnected from yourself, the longer you endure something that's not refinement, that's a signal you're misreading as a test. Now watch this. The third type is testing fire. This one arrives specifically when you've just made a declaration, when you've set a boundary, chosen a direction, or stepped into a new identity. Testing fire doesn't show up before the decision. It shows up after. It's the immediate resistance that follows a moment of alignment designed not to break you, but to verify whether you mean what you just said. The signature here is timing. If the difficulty arrived the moment you decided to change something real that's not coincidence, that's the refiner checking the tensile strength of what was just formed. Think about that in concrete terms. You finally set a financial boundary. You stopped lending money you couldn't afford to people who never repaid it. And within days, someone you care about came to you with exactly that request, framed in exactly the most emotionally difficult way possible. That's testing fire. You committed to a new professional direction, and immediately the old opportunity, the comfortable one, the familiar one, showed up looking more attractive than it ever did before. Testing fire again. The test isn't designed to trick you. It's designed to confirm that the decision you made was real and not just aspirational. Here's what nobody tells you about reading fire correctly. The misreading isn't usually about intelligence, it's about the question you're asking while you're in it. Most people ask, "How do I get out of this?" That question is neutral at best, dangerous at worst, because it bypasses the more important question entirely. The question that serves you is, what is this specific pain asking me to do or stop doing or understand? When you ask that question honestly with your defenses down and your ego out of the room, the fire almost always answers, not loudly, not dramatically, but clearly enough that you know. Chosen one. You've already survived fires you couldn't name at the time. You came out of them changed, even if you didn't fully understand why. But from this point forward, you don't have to move through difficulty blind. You have the framework now. Refining fire, stay present and let it clarify you. Warning fire, stop, read the signal and move accordingly. Testing fire, hold your position and don't negotiate what you've already decided. The refiner isn't arbitrary. The heat always has a language, and you are always capable of learning to read it. You can read the fire now. You have the framework. But here's what comes next, and this is where the work gets more interior, more precise. Because reading external difficulty is one skill. Reading your own internal signal is another. And the second one is harder, not because it's more complex, but because it requires you to trust something in yourself that the world has spent a long time teaching you to doubt. What we're talking about now is the frequency you were born carrying, and more specifically, how to know when you're operating from it versus when you've drifted from it without realizing. Here's the thing. Every person carrying a genuine spiritual lineage has what I'd call a bloodline signal, a set of internal indicators that function like a compass. Not a loud compass, not one that announces itself dramatically, a quiet one. The kind that doesn't shout when you're off course, but creates a persistent low-level friction that doesn't resolve no matter how much you adjust externally. You've felt it. You've rearranged your circumstances, changed your environment, switched the people around you, and the friction remained. That's because the signal wasn't responding to your surroundings. It was responding to your alignment. Stay with me. There are 5 specific signals that tell you the bloodline is running correctly, that you're operating from your actual design rather than a performance of it. The first is discomfort with unnecessary smallness. Not dissatisfaction for its own sake, not restlessness born from impatience, but a specific clean discomfort that arises when you're asked to compress yourself into a version that doesn't match what you know you're carrying. It shows up in rooms where the conversation is deliberately shallow. It shows up in agreements that require you to pretend you see less than you actually see. That discomfort isn't arrogance, it's a calibration signal. It's the bloodline telling you that the container you're currently in is the wrong size. The second signal is the ability to distinguish between being recognized and being managed. Most people can't tell the difference in the moment. Both feel like positive attention. Both involve someone responding to you with what looks like appreciation. But the bloodline signal reads it differently. Being recognized means someone sees what's actually there and responds to the reality of it. Being managed means someone has identified your need for validation and is using it to keep you compliant and comfortable. When you're operating from your signal clearly, you feel the difference immediately. The flattery that should feel good lands hollow. The honest acknowledgement that comes without embellishment lands with weight. That distinction matters enormously for every room you walk into. Think about that in a practical context. You're in a professional setting. A senior figure praises your work publicly in a way that's slightly too effusive, slightly too broad, and something in you doesn't fully receive it, even though on the surface it looks like exactly what you wanted. That's the signal running. It's telling you that the praise wasn't about the work. It was about keeping you invested in a dynamic that serves someone else's agenda. The bloodline doesn't let that pass unchecked. It registers the frequency of what's actually being communicated beneath the words. Now watch this. The third signal is that your boundaries become more precise after each violation, not more eroded. This is one of the clearest markers of genuine spiritual lineage. The old version of you may have experienced betrayal and responded by either collapsing the boundary entirely or building a wall so thick that nothing could get through. But as the bloodline activates more fully, something different happens. Each time a line is crossed, you don't just feel the pain of it, you receive information from it. You understand more specifically where the line needed to be, why it was crossed, and what structural adjustment is required going forward. The violation doesn't make you more fearful, it makes you more accurate. Here's what nobody tells you about the fourth signal. It's the one that feels most uncomfortable to admit. It's the pull toward greater responsibility, not toward power, not toward status, but toward weight. You felt it. The sense that you're not being fully used, that the capacity you're carrying is larger than what's currently being asked of it. The world will tell you that's ego. The bloodline knows it isn't. Ego wants recognition. This pull wants assignment. It wants to be given something that actually requires everything you have, because some part of you knows that's the only context in which you're fully alive. The fifth signal is the felt sense of being held even when the evidence says otherwise. You've been in moments where by every logical measure you should have been finished financially, relationally, professionally, and somehow you weren't. Something intervened that you couldn't account for, a door that opened with no explanation, a resource that appeared without a traceable source. That's not luck. That's protection that accompanies the bloodline. It doesn't announce itself. It just shows up quietly and precisely at the moments when the design requires it. Take a breath right now. Let these 5 signals settle somewhere real in you, not as concepts to remember, but as things you've already experienced and can now name. Because, Anointed One, the signal has always been there. You weren't missing it, you just didn't have language for it yet. And a signal you can name is a signal you can navigate by. You have the signals now. You can read the fire. You can recognize when you're operating from your actual design versus when you've drifted from it. And if this were a different kind of message, this is the point where everything would start to feel celebratory, where the tone would shift into triumph, and you'd be sent forward on a wave of inspiration that feels enormous in the moment and dissipates by morning. But that's not what this is, because there's something that has to be said here that most voices on this subject consistently avoid. And avoiding it isn't kindness. It's the most expensive omission in the conversation. Here's the thing. The bloodline you carry is not a privilege without a price. It is not an identity you get to wear selectively, putting it on when you need confidence and setting it aside when it becomes inconvenient. It is a living responsibility. And the refiner who has been precise about every other element of this process is equally precise about this. He does not release greater weight to a structure that hasn't demonstrated it can hold what it's already been given. That's not a threat. That's physics. A foundation that can't bear its current load doesn't get more placed on it, not because it's been rejected, but because adding more would destroy it. Stay with me. The first demand of the bloodline is a standard of discipline that exceeds what the people around you are holding themselves to. Not because you're better than them, because you're carrying more than them. A person transporting ordinary cargo and a person transporting something irreplaceable move through the same road differently. The second one checks the straps. The second one slows down at the turns. The second one doesn't take shortcuts that the first one can afford to take. That's not restriction. That's the appropriate response to understanding what you're carrying. When you treat your time, your energy, your decisions, and your relationships with the same casualness as someone who isn't accountable to this kind of calling, you're not being free. You're being irresponsible with something that was entrusted to you. Think about what that looks like in the actual texture of daily life. It means your morning isn't negotiable just because the night ran long. It means you don't consume information, entertainment, or company that contradicts the frequency you're trying to maintain, not because those things are evil, but because you can't afford the static. It means when you make a commitment, even a small one, you treat it as a load-bearing wall in a structure that people are depending on. Discipline at this level isn't glamorous. It doesn't trend. But it is the difference between someone who carries a calling and someone who used to. Now watch this. The second demand is what I'd call intentional solitude. And this is critically different from the isolation you've already endured. The isolation that marked your earlier seasons was largely imposed on you. It was painful because it was passive, because it arrived as rejection rather than choice. Intentional solitude is something else entirely. It's the deliberate practice of going alone into the place where the signal is clearest, not because you're avoiding people, but because there are things the refiner communicates in silence that cannot be transmitted through noise. The chosen ones who have consistently operated at the highest levels of their calling throughout history have all without exception understood this. They protected their alone time not as a luxury, but as a non-negotiable maintenance practice. You don't hear clearly when you're always surrounded, and you can't carry accurately what you haven't heard clearly. Here's what nobody tells you about the third demand, and this one is the sharpest edge of the whole conversation. You cannot use this identity as insulation from accountability. This is the point where the bloodline gets weaponized by people who have a partial understanding of it. They take the truth that they're different, that they're designed for more, that the conventional system wasn't built for them, and they use it to explain away every difficulty, excuse every failure, and avoid every correction. That is not the bloodline operating. That is the ego using the language of the bloodline as a defense mechanism. And the refiner is not confused by the difference even when you are. Let that land, because the same fire that refines also exposes. And one of the things it most reliably exposes is whether you're growing into your calling or hiding behind it. Growth looks like increasing precision, increasing responsibility, increasing capacity to serve something larger than your own comfort. Hiding looks like using your uniqueness as a reason why the ordinary rules don't apply to you, why the relationship didn't work, why the opportunity fell apart, why the money didn't hold. One of those postures is the bloodline. The other is its counterfeit. Chosen one. The scripture is clear: to whom much is given, much will be required. The refiner doesn't hand weight to people he doesn't believe can carry it. But he also doesn't excuse the ones he's entrusted from the full weight of that trust. You were built for this. That remains true. And being built for something means being held to the standard that something demands, not less. Exactly that. You've held the cost. You've looked at the demands without flinching. And something in the way you're still here, still reading, still tracking, still willing to be held to that standard, tells me the structure is already more solid than you've been giving yourself credit for. Because people who aren't built for this don't make it to chapter 7. They exit earlier when the message stops flattering them and starts requiring something. So here's what that willingness unlocks. Here's what happens when the interior work stops being invisible. Here's the thing. Everything you've been building inward, the discernment, the discipline, the signal recognition, the refusal to use your calling as a shield, none of it stays contained. It can't. The interior always leaks into the exterior, not through announcement, not through performance, through presence. And presence is something that can't be faked, can't be manufactured, and can't be purchased with credentials or connections or carefully curated appearances. It either exists in a room or it doesn't. And when it does, everyone feels it, including people who couldn't articulate why. Stay with me. This is what genuine authority actually is. Not volume, not title, not the size of your network or the impressiveness of your resume. Genuine authority is what happens when a person has been so thoroughly refined, so consistently aligned with their actual design, that their internal coherence becomes externally undeniable. It's the quality that makes a room adjust when you enter it without you saying a word. It's the reason people seek your counsel on matters they haven't fully explained, because something in them trusts that you'll understand the unspoken parts. That quality isn't cultivated through strategy. It's the byproduct of having gone through exactly what you've gone through and having refused to let it make you something lesser. Now watch this. In practical terms, this authority shows up most visibly in how you handle pressure in high-stakes environments. Consider a room full of people with more years, more titles, more conventional credibility than you. The old version of you entered that room trying to prove something, speaking more than necessary positioning, carefully making sure the right people noticed the right things. But the version of you that's been through the fire doesn't enter that room the same way. This version is quiet in a different register. Not the quiet of insecurity, not the quiet of someone waiting for permission to speak. The quiet of someone who knows exactly what they're carrying and has learned that the most powerful thing they can do is wait for the precise moment when their contribution will land with the most weight. Think about that. Authority that announces itself is always slightly defensive. It needs to be seen to feel real. But authority that's been forged through the process we've been describing doesn't need the room's confirmation to feel legitimate, which is precisely what makes the room confirm it. There's a paradox at the center of this, that the refiner builds into the design intentionally. The moment you stop needing to be seen is the moment you become impossible to overlook. Here's what nobody tells you about the transition from inner work to outer positioning. It doesn't happen through a single dramatic moment. It happens through accumulation, through the compounding of small decisions made correctly over time. Every time you chose not to react when reaction would have been justified, you were building it. Every time you held a boundary that cost you something, you were building it. Every time you stayed in the refining fire when running would have been easier, you were building it. The authority you're stepping into now isn't new. It's the sum of everything you were doing in the seasons that looked like nothing was happening. Let that land. Because there are people in your life right now, people who watched you go through the difficult seasons, who perhaps even contributed to them, who are beginning to sense that something has shifted. They can't name it exactly, but the dynamic is changing. The way they speak to you is adjusting slightly. The way they factor you into decisions is different than it was. That's not your imagination. That's the exterior catching up to the interior. That's the alchemy completing itself. Chosen one. The refiner didn't put you through the furnace so you could emerge quietly and live in private certainty. The blade was never meant to stay in the forge. It was meant to be of use in rooms that matter, in moments that require exactly what you've been made into. You've been prepared for a kind of influence that doesn't need to force its way in. It gets invited, and the invitations are already forming. The invitations are forming, the authority is becoming visible, and right on schedule, because this is always how it works. The resources start to move. Opportunities that were closed begin to open. Financial conversations that were distant start becoming real. The world begins to respond to the shift in your structure in the most concrete way it knows how. It starts putting things in your hands. And this is the moment that reveals something the fire couldn't, not because the fire wasn't thorough, but because there's a specific kind of test that only arrives with increase, not with difficulty, with abundance. Here's the thing. The refiner doesn't release financial weight to a structure that hasn't been verified under pressure. That's not withholding, that's precision. A container that leaks under small volume will not hold large volume. A foundation that shifts under light load will not survive a heavy one. And what most people don't realize is that the seasons of financial scarcity weren't just hard times to be endured until something better arrived. They were the training ground for stewardship. They were the environment in which your relationship with money, what it means to you, what you're willing to do for it, what you're willing to sacrifice because of it, was being formed and tested at a scale you could afford to get wrong. Stay with me. Because the relationship between the bloodline you carry and the way you handle money is not incidental. It's direct. How you manage what you currently have is a precise indicator of what you're ready to be trusted with next. Not morally, this isn't about judgment. Structurally, a person who can't make disciplined decisions with a small amount of money isn't suddenly going to develop that capacity when the amount becomes large. The behavior scales. The patterns that are present at low stakes will be present at high stakes amplified. And the refiner knows this better than you do. Think about what this looks like concretely. You receive an unexpected financial windfall, a contract, a bonus, an inheritance, a deal that closes larger than you projected. The immediate internal response to that moment is one of the most revealing things about where you actually are in this process. Does the first instinct move toward visibility, toward acquiring the things that signal arrival, toward finally being seen as someone who has made it? Or does the first instinct move toward architecture, toward asking what infrastructure this capital could build, what foundation it could reinforce, what future capacity it could create? Those two responses come from completely different internal structures, and only one of them is the bloodline speaking. Now watch this. There are 3 markers that tell you your financial structure is ready for what the refiner is about to place in it. The first is the ability to decline money that arrives with the wrong terms and do it without panic. Not without discomfort. Without panic. Because panic means the money has more authority over you than your design does. The second marker is the capacity to delay reward without feeling robbed. This isn't about deprivation, it's about the ability to look at a seed and see a harvest rather than just looking at a seed and feeling hungry. The third marker is that you're already building systems before you need them, not after the resources arrive. Before. Because people who build the container before the water comes are people who understand that provision follows preparation, not the other way around. Here's what nobody tells you about the intersection of spiritual calling and financial reality. The world has created a false separation between them, as if being spiritually serious requires being financially passive, as if caring about resources is somehow in conflict with caring about higher things. That separation is a lie and an expensive one. The refiner is not impressed by poverty. He's not moved by financial dysfunction dressed up as humility. What he's looking for is stewardship. The active, intelligent, disciplined management of everything he's placed in your hands, including the material. Especially the material, because that's where the abstract values you claim to hold get tested against something concrete. Take a breath right now, not rushed, the kind that settles something. Because this is a chapter that has the potential to rearrange some deeply held assumptions about what it means to be spiritually serious in the world. Anointed One. You were not called out of the material world, you were called to operate within it, with a completely different set of internal rules. The balance sheet is not separate from the bloodline. It is one of the places the bloodline is most legibly written. And what gets written there in the decisions you make when resources arrive will determine how much more the refiner trusts you to carry next. The balance sheet is being rewritten, the structure is holding, and if you've been honest with yourself through everything this message has asked of you, the reframing, the cost, the discipline, the financial reckoning, then something is already different in how you're carrying yourself. Not louder, steadier, and that steadiness is about to be tested in a way that catches more people off guard than the fire ever did. Because the most disorienting season in the life of someone on this path isn't the season of difficulty. It's the season when the difficulty starts lifting and the expansion begins to arrive. Here's the thing. Difficulty, for all its pain, has one significant gift built into it: clarity of priority. When you're in survival mode, you know exactly what matters. You protect the essentials, you cut the noise, you move with the kind of focused intentionality that crisis produces automatically. But when the pressure eases, when the resources start flowing, when the opportunities begin multiplying, and the relationships start expanding, that automatic clarity disappears. Suddenly, everything feels important. Suddenly, every open door looks like the right door. And the person who navigated the fire with extraordinary precision starts making scattered decisions, not because they've lost their discernment, but because abundance creates a different kind of test than scarcity does. one that most people haven't been trained for. Stay with me. The technical term for what happens in this season is structural overextension. It's when the growth of your external life begins to outpace the depth of your internal foundation. And it doesn't announce itself dramatically, it creeps. It looks like saying yes to too many good things. It looks like adding people to your inner circle faster than you can actually assess them. It looks like the daily practices that kept you calibrated during the hard seasons becoming negotiable now that things are going well, as if the discipline was for surviving difficulty rather than for maintaining the frequency you've worked this hard to establish. And slowly, quietly, the signal starts drifting. Not because something attacked you, because you stopped protecting the architecture. Think about what this looks like in real terms. You get the promotion, the business starts gaining traction, the network expands, and almost immediately the schedule that once had protected space for silence, for recalibration, for honest self-assessment, that schedule fills, not with bad things, with opportunities, with people who want access to what you're building, with demands that feel legitimate because they are legitimate. And 6 months later you look up and realize you haven't heard the signal clearly in weeks. You've been moving, but you've been moving on momentum rather than alignment. That distinction matters more than most people realize until they've drifted far enough to feel the difference. Now watch this. The refiner designed the expansion season with the same intentionality he designed the fire. It's not a reward you graduate into where the rules of stewardship no longer apply. It's a new curriculum with higher stakes and subtler tests, and the core skill it requires is something I'd call stability under expansion, the ability to grow your external capacity without losing the interior coherence that made the growth possible in the first place. It requires you to hold two things simultaneously, the openness to receive what's coming and the discipline to refuse what would compromise the structure that earned it. Here's what nobody tells you about managing this season well. The greatest threat isn't the enemies who rise when you rise. You've been prepared for opposition. You know how to read that fire. The greatest threat is the well-meaning people who arrive with genuine enthusiasm for what you're building and who, without any malicious intent, begin to pull your attention in 17 directions at once. Not everyone who celebrates your expansion is equipped to support it. Some people are drawn to the light you're producing without having the capacity to help you sustain it. And the bloodline signal you've been learning to read will tell you the difference if you're quiet enough to hear it. 3 things anchor you in this season without exception. You protect the foundational practices that kept you calibrated before the expansion. They don't become optional because things are going well. They become more critical. You grow your relationships deliberately rather than rapidly, because a network that expands faster than your ability to discern it becomes a liability. And you return regularly and honestly to the question that has no ego in it. What is this being built for? And am I still building it for that chosen one? The weight of what's coming is real. But you were not refined through everything you've been through so that you could collapse under the arrival of what you were refined for. The same refiner who held you in the fire is present in the expansion. The same precision that governed your difficulty governs your increase. Hold the structure, protect the signal. What's coming requires everything you've become, and you're ready. You're still here. And I want you to understand what that means, not sentimentally, not as a comfort offered at the end of a long message, but structurally. The people who needed flattery left earlier. The ones who needed permission left when the cost was named. The ones who wanted a shortcut left when the discipline was laid out without apology. You stayed through all of it. And that's not a small thing. That's the signal running exactly as it should. Here's the thing. Everything in this message, the reframing of your pain, the naming of the lie, the shift from victim to steward, the fire taxonomy, the bloodline signals the cost, the authority, the financial reckoning, the stability under expansion. None of it was new information placed into an empty space. It was language placed onto things you already knew, things you'd already felt but couldn't articulate. Things that had been living in you as a persistent, unresolved knowing that something about your story didn't add up the way the world was telling you it did. That knowing was never confusion. It was accuracy. It was the signal telling you that the diagnosis you'd been handed didn't match the actual design. Stay with me for just a moment longer, because the refiner's final word over your life isn't a dramatic pronouncement. It isn't thunder. It's quieter than that and more permanent. It's this: you were not lost. You were being made. Every season that looked like abandonment was formation. Every silence that felt like absence was preparation. Every fire that seemed disproportionate was precision, the exact temperature required for the exact thing being formed. Nothing was wasted, not the betrayals, not the years that seemed to disappear into difficulty, not the relationships that ended without explanation, not the opportunities that closed before you could reach them. The refiner doesn't waste material. He's invested this much heat into. Now watch this. There's a version of your story that ends with you understanding all of this intellectually, nodding at the truth of it, feeling it land in the moment, and then returning to the same patterns, the same doubts, the same unconscious smallness that the lie originally installed. That version is available to you. It's the easier version. It requires nothing beyond this moment. But there's another version. The one where this understanding becomes operational, where the reframe doesn't just feel true, but begins to govern how you enter rooms, how you handle resources, how you respond to pressure, how you protect your signal, how you carry the weight of what's coming without losing the coherence of what was built. That version requires you to treat what you've received here not as content, but as commission. Here's what nobody tells you about arriving at a moment like this one. The arrival isn't the destination. It's the beginning of a different kind of accountability. You know too much now to move the way you moved before. You can't unknow the fire taxonomy. You can't unfeel the bloodline signal once you've named it. You can't unsee the difference between refining fire and warning fire, between being recognized and being managed, between building the container and spending what should have filled it. The knowledge is active now, and active knowledge demands a response. Take a breath, the real kind, the one that goes all the way down and comes back up slowly. Let this settle not just in your mind, but somewhere deeper in the place where the decisions that actually change things get made. Because chosen one, the scripture says it plainly, when you pass through the fire, you will not be burned. Not that the fire won't be real, not that it won't be hot, but that it will not have the final word over what you become. The refiner has that word, and he spoke it over you long before you understood enough to receive it. If something in you recognized itself in this message, not the flattery of it, but the weight of it, leave a word below. Not for the algorithm, not for the numbers, as a marker for yourself. A record that on this day you heard something true and you didn't look away.